You'll be shocked by what you hear. I guarantee it. You think you know your partner? I thought I did, too. Turns out, 15 years of marriage isn't long enough to know someone's deepest secrets. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This all started as a joke. A wild, innocent idea that was supposed to spice things up. It spiced things up, all right, just not the way I imagined. It was the hottest summer Mississippi had seen in years, and our little house just outside of Jackson felt like it was baking from the inside out. The air conditioner was doing its best, but I was still in my boxers with a cold beer in hand, flipping channels and avoiding everything on my to-do list. My wife, Sarah, walked in wearing a sundress that made her look like one of those Instagram influencers, except she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't have to. She flopped onto the couch beside me, tucked her legs under her, and said, "You know what we need? An industrial fan? A pool? A one-way ticket to Alaska?" I offered, grinning. She laughed, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Mischief, maybe. "No, we need to mix things up." I raised an eyebrow. Mix things up how? Like, redecorate? I'm not painting the kitchen again, Sarah. That green you picked last time still gives me nightmares. She rolled her eyes. I'm serious. I mean, we've been married a long time, right? Maybe it's time to explore. I blinked, caught off guard. Explore what? She hesitated, biting her lip. That was always her tell when she was nervous. I mean, what if we invited someone else? You know, into the bedroom? I laughed, because I was sure she was joking. Right. And after that, we can join a circus or start an underground fight club. I'm serious, she said, her voice steady. A lot of couples do it. It could be fun. Something new. No strings attached, just us, experimenting. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh it off again, but the way she was looking at me, earnest, hopeful, maybe even a little nervous, made me pause. Sarah wasn't impulsive. She didn't suggest things like this lightly. I set my beer down and looked at her closely. You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you? She nodded. I feel like we're in a rut, you know? I love you. I do. But I don't want us to look back in 10 years and feel like we let things go stale. It was a strange thing to hear. On one hand, it stung a little. Wasn't I enough for her? But on the other hand, I understood. Marriage wasn't easy. It was routine and comfort, sure, but it could also be repetitive. We talked about it for hours that night. She promised it wasn't about replacing anything, just adding something new. A spark. She even suggested rules. No emotional attachments. No one we knew personally, and complete honesty every step of the way. I finally agreed, partly because I wanted to make her happy, but mostly because her excitement was contagious. She said she'd take care of finding someone, and I figured it would take weeks, maybe months. But 3 days later, she told me she'd met a guy online. When I opened the door that Friday night, I didn't know what to expect. The guy standing on our porch wasn't what I imagined. He was tall, mid-30s, with an easy smile and a handshake firm enough to crush bones. He introduced himself as Nate, and I couldn't help but like him. He was polite, even a little shy, and he didn't have that sleazy vibe I'd worried about. We spent the evening talking over dinner, barbecue from my favorite joint down the road. Nate told us he was new to the area, working in construction and living out of a rental until he figured out where to settle down. He laughed at my jokes, listened to Sarah like she was the most fascinating person in the room, and didn't seem fazed by the awkwardness of the situation. By the end of the night, I found myself thinking, if this is what Sarah wants, maybe it's not so crazy after all. At first, it was exactly what we'd agreed on. Nate came by a couple of times a month, and everything felt surprisingly normal. He was respectful, kept to the boundaries we'd set, and never overstayed his welcome. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice little things. The way Sarah seemed to light up when he walked in the door. The way they'd share a joke I didn't quite catch. Once, I came home early from a work meeting and found them sitting on the porch, laughing about something. They jumped apart when they saw me, like two teenagers caught sneaking a beer. Just talking, Sarah said quickly. Nate nodded, looking a little too casual. I brushed it off at the time. After all, I'd agreed to this. I couldn't exactly get jealous now, could I? But that nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Nate and I were sitting in the backyard, drinking beer while Sarah was inside making lemonade. We were talking about football. Nate was a Saints fan, which I'd forgiven him for, and somehow the conversation shifted to childhood memories. You ever go fishing on Barnett Reservoir? I asked. My dad used to take me there every summer. Best catfish in the state. Nate smiled. Yeah, I've been there. Your wife told me you guys used to go there on your anniversary every year. Must have been a nice tradition. I froze, my beer halfway to my mouth. She told you that? He nodded, not noticing the way my hands clenched around the bottle. Here's the thing. Sarah and I hadn't gone to Barnett in years. But when we did, we never took anyone else. It was our place, our little escape. I couldn't remember ever mentioning it to anyone, let alone Nate. That's when it hit me. He knew things he shouldn't know. I couldn't shake it. Nate knowing about Barnett Reservoir wasn't just a coincidence. That place had been a sacred little corner of our lives. The kind of detail Sarah and I shared only with each other. So how the hell did he know? I tried to play it cool, keeping my face blank, but my mind was racing. As soon as Nate left that evening, I asked Sarah. Hey, I said, leaning casually against the kitchen counter as she cleaned up. Did you ever tell Nate about Barnett? You know, that we used to go there? She frowned, glancing over her shoulder. Barnett? No, I don't think so. Why? Oh, no reason. I lied. He just brought it up earlier. Thought it was odd. Her hands stilled for just a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. He did? Huh. Maybe I mentioned it at some point and forgot. Maybe, I said, watching her closely. But something about the way she avoided my gaze set off every alarm bell in my head. From that point on, things started unraveling. Nate's visits became more frequent. What had started as a once-in-a-while arrangement was now a weekly event. He'd show up after work, sometimes even unannounced, and Sarah never seemed surprised to see him. One night, I came home late from a work meeting to find them sitting on the couch, deep in conversation. They didn't hear me come in at first, and I stood there for a moment, just watching. Nate was leaning toward her, his hand resting lightly on the arm of the couch. Sarah was smiling at him, her face soft in a way I hadn't seen in years. When they noticed me, they both straightened up quickly. Too quickly. Hey, Sarah said, a little too brightly. How was the meeting? It was fine, I said, my voice flat. Nate stood up, rubbing the back of his neck. I should get going. Early day tomorrow. After he left, I turned to Sarah. Does he always come over when I'm not here? She looked taken aback. What? No, of course not. He just stopped by to drop something off, and we got to talking. Right? I said, not believing a word of it. The doubts ate at me. Every little thing started to feel like a clue, a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to see. Sarah was on her phone more than usual, texting late at night. She started wearing makeup on days she didn't usually bother. And then there were the whispers, little murmurs of conversation I'd catch when she didn't know I was nearby. One night, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. My heart pounding. I got up and found her in the living room, her face lit by the glow of her phone. Couldn't sleep? I asked, my voice startling her. She jumped, clutching the phone to her chest. Yeah, just couldn't shut my brain off. Her smile was too forced, her eyes darting to the clock. 2:37 a.m. I didn't press her that night, but I couldn't stop the thoughts swirling in my head. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was cleaning out the garage, something I'd been putting off for months, when I found it. A box I didn't recognize, tucked away on the highest shelf. It was old, dusty, and taped shut, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were photos, dozens of them, of Sarah, some from years ago, before we'd even met. In every single one, she was with Nate. My stomach turned as I flipped through the pictures. There they were at a beach, her head resting on his shoulder. At a barbecue, laughing like they were the only two people in the world. And then, the worst one. A photo of them kissing, her hands tangled in his hair. When Sarah came home that evening, I was waiting for her. The box sat on the coffee table between us, a silent accusation. What's this? I asked, my voice low. Her face went pale. Where did you find that? In the garage, I said. Care to explain why our guest of honor has a starring role in your past? She opened her mouth, closed it again, and then sank onto the couch. I didn't want you to find out like this. That's a hell of an understatement, I said, my anger barely contained. How long have you known him, Sarah? She hesitated, then whispered, since college. College? I repeated, my voice rising. And you didn't think to mention that when you brought him into our home? Into our bed? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said. I thought it wouldn't matter. It's been years, and we weren't even serious back then. Not serious? I said, holding up the photo of them kissing. This doesn't look casual to me. The argument lasted for hours. She swore up and down that their past relationship meant nothing, that she'd only reached out to him because she thought he'd be a good fit. The words made my stomach churn. I didn't believe her. Not entirely. There were too many pieces that didn't add up, too many moments that felt like more than coincidence. And the way she looked at him, I told her I needed time, space. I packed a bag that night and checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. That's where I am now, sitting on a lumpy bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and wondering how the hell my life got here. The next morning, I woke up to a half-dead phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. 4 missed calls from Sarah, 3 from her sister, and 1 from an unknown number. The texts were piling up, too. Messages ranging from frantic apologies to what I could only interpret as thinly veiled pleas for me to come home and talk things through. But I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't do. I called Nate. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. Hello? It's me, I said. We need to talk. Face to face. There was a pause. Look, man, I get it. This is complicated. But maybe we should let Sarah... No, I interrupted. Not Sarah. Just you and me. Tonight. He hesitated, then sighed. Fine. Where? We met at a dive bar on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where the floors were sticky, the lighting was dim enough to hide the stains on the walls, and nobody asked questions. Nate was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer at a corner table. He looked up as I approached, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. I wasn't sure you'd actually show, he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. I didn't bother with pleasantries. How long, Nate? He blinked, caught off guard. How long what? You know damn well what I mean, I said, my voice low but sharp. How long have you been seeing Sarah? His eyes darted around the room, like he was looking for an escape route. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. Look, I didn't plan for any of this to happen, all right? When she reached out to me, it was supposed to be casual. No strings. Just like you guys agreed. But it wasn't casual, was it? I said, my anger simmering beneath the surface. You knew her from before. From college. She didn't just reach out to some random guy. She went looking for you. Nate didn't answer right away. He just stared at his beer, swirling it in the bottle like he was trying to conjure an answer. I didn't know she was married, he said finally. Not at first. She didn't tell me until after we'd already reconnected. Reconnected? I repeated, the word like acid on my tongue. He flinched. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear. But when she told me about you, about the arrangement, I figured it was a chance to keep things honest. To make it right. I laughed bitterly. Right? You think sneaking around behind my back is right? That's not what I meant, he said quickly. I mean, I thought maybe we could keep it under control. No one had to get hurt. Well, guess what, Nate? People got hurt. The drive back to the motel was a blur. My head was spinning, a toxic mix of rage, betrayal, and confusion. Nate's words played on a loop in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I thought about calling Sarah, thought about confronting her, demanding answers to the questions swirling in my head. But every time I picked up my phone, I put it back down. A few days passed, each one more agonizing than the last. I stayed at the motel, surviving on fast food and too much cheap whiskey, while Sarah continued to call and text relentlessly. Her messages shifted from desperate apologies to tearful confessions, and finally to icy silence. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got a call from someone I never expected. It was Sarah's sister, Jess. Hey, she said, her voice hesitant. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I think you should come over. Sarah's not doing great. Jess, I'm not ready to. She's not eating, Mike. She's barely sleeping. Whatever's going on between you two, you need to fix it. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's not that simple. Maybe not, she said. But you love her, don't you? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course I loved Sarah. Even now, after everything, I couldn't imagine my life without her. But love wasn't the issue. Trust was. I'll think about it, I said finally. Good, Jess said. But don't take too long. She needs you. Against my better judgment, I went back to the house that evening. The lights were off when I pulled into the driveway, and for a moment, I wondered if Jess had been exaggerating. But when I stepped inside, the silence was deafening. No TV, no music, no sound of Sarah bustling around the kitchen. Just the faint hum of the fridge and the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair a mess, and she looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had crushed her. "Mike," she whispered, sitting up as soon as she saw me. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, torn between anger and heartbreak. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling, "for everything. For lying. For keeping things from you. I never meant to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice cracking despite myself. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting the edge of the blanket. "I don't have a good answer for that. I guess. I was scared. Of losing you. Of losing myself. Nate was a part of my life a long time ago, and when I saw him again, it just brought back all these memories. But it was never about him. It was about us." "Us?" I said bitterly. "How the hell was any of this about us?" "Because I thought it would help," she said, her voice rising. "I thought it would bring us closer, make us stronger. But I was wrong. I see that now." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something other than anger. Was it enough to fix what was broken? I didn't know. But for the first time, I was willing to try. The days that followed were like walking a tightrope. I'd moved back into the house, but the distance between Sarah and me was palpable. Every conversation was careful, every interaction weighed down by the unspoken tension of what had happened. I wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly sorry and that we could somehow piece our lives back together. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was Nate. His face, his voice, the way he'd seemed so comfortable in my home, in my marriage. It was a ghost that wouldn't leave me alone. Sarah was trying. Harder than I'd ever seen her try before. She cooked my favorite meals, left little notes for me to find around the house, and even suggested we go to counseling. But no matter how much she tried, I couldn't let go of the nagging feeling that there was more she wasn't telling me. And then, one night, I found the proof. It was late, and Sarah had already gone to bed. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels but not really watching, my mind too restless to settle. Her phone was on the coffee table, buzzing with a new notification. She'd been transparent with her phone since I came back. No more locking it, no more hiding it when I walked into the room. But something about the way it buzzed that night caught my attention. I picked it up, hesitating for a moment before unlocking it. Her messages were open, and most of them were from Jess, her mom, or coworkers. But then I saw it. A message from an unsaved number. "Still thinking about you. Can't believe it's over." My stomach dropped. The confrontation happened the next morning. I couldn't wait any longer. I walked into the kitchen, where Sarah was making coffee, and set her phone down on the counter in front of her. "Who's this?" I asked, my voice cold. She looked at the screen and went pale. "Mike, I can explain." "Then explain," I snapped, my patience finally snapping. "Who the hell is still thinking about you? And what's over?" She sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "It's Nate," she admitted finally. "He's been texting me since you left." I didn't respond, I swear. "But you didn't block him either," I said. "Why?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. Maybe part of me felt guilty. Like I owed him something for dragging him into this mess." "Dragging him into this mess?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "You dragged him into our marriage, Sarah. You're the one who brought him here, who lied to me about knowing him, who let him get in the way of us." She didn't say anything, just sat there, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. But then I remembered the message, and the guilt turned to resolve. "This has to stop," I said firmly. "If we're going to fix this, you need to cut him out. Completely. No more texts, no more calls, no more anything. Do you understand?" She nodded. wiping her eyes. I'll block him. I promise. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. The next week, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on. Sarah had blocked Nate. Or at least she said she had, but she was still acting off, jumpy, distracted, like she was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. It was a Friday afternoon, and she told me she was going to run errands in town. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and tailed her car at a safe distance. She went to the grocery store first, then the post office, and I started to feel stupid. Maybe she really was just running errands. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then she pulled into the parking lot of a small diner on the edge of town. She parked, got out, and walked inside. I waited a few minutes before following, my heart pounding in my chest. The diner was quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. I spotted her immediately, sitting in a booth near the back. And she wasn't alone. Nate was there. They weren't touching, weren't even sitting particularly close, but the tension between them was undeniable. She was leaning forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, while he sat back, looking far too relaxed for my liking. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. The betrayal was written all over her face. When Sarah got home that evening, I was waiting for her again. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I told you," she said, avoiding my gaze. "Running errands." "Really?" I said, crossing my arms. "Because I could have sworn I saw you at the diner. With Nate." Her face went white. "Mike, Don't," I said sharply. "Don't lie to me again. Just tell me the truth, Sarah. What the hell is going on?" She broke down then, the weight of everything finally crashing down on her. She told me about their meeting, about how Nate had reached out to her after I'd confronted him at the bar, how he'd begged her to meet him, just once, to get closure. "I told him it was over," she said through her tears. "I told him I couldn't see him again. But I didn't want to tell you because I knew you wouldn't believe me." "You're damn right I wouldn't believe you," I said. "Not after everything you've already lied about." That night, I slept on the couch. I couldn't even look at her, let alone share a bed with her. The next morning, I started packing. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I can't do this anymore," I said, shoving clothes into a bag. "I've tried, Sarah. God knows I've tried. But this is too much." "Please," she said, grabbing my arm. "Don't go. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can." "It's too late," I said, pulling away. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." As I drove away from the house, I felt a strange sense of relief. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let Sarah, or Nate, or anyone else dictate my life anymore.